The United States and the UK just made a partnership that could allow the UK to come into American ground and freeze your savings. I know this sounds like a hyperbole, but today I'm going to line out in this entire video how the United States never really had monetary freedom from the United Kingdom or Great Britain, and the British Empire still has their claws inside the United States. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but it all has to do with the Online Safety Act for the UK, the United States and the UK partnership, and the Bank of England and all of these interest rate cuts. But the great thing is on the bright side, I think Donald Trump has realized what is going on. So we are going to go through all of this. But first, of course, we have to go into just outlining this Online Safety Act and how the British can now come in and use the United States companies to try to freeze your savings.
And there are forces outside of the American government in the NGO space, and there are, of course, foreign countries who want to take that away from the United States. And so one of their strategies was to try to achieve via the back door what they couldn't achieve via the front, because the US government can't boss around American citizens and tell us what we can and can't say. The First Amendment, of course, is geographically bounded. It is limited to the United States. So there were a series of legal regimes that have been stood up across the world. One of them in Europe is called the Digital Services Act. One of them in the United Kingdom is called the Online Safety Act. And
so these acts are now being used to suppress the free speech around the globe. And that's not just beside the point, because we've already started to see that in the United States. I mean, think about it. If you've said anything against political governments, we've seen people from JP Morgan, we've seen if you buy Bitcoin or something else, that they've already been using these kinds of things to freeze your accounts. And if you say anything online, well, they've been using it to freeze your accounts and control your money in a sense. So sure, the United States has freedom of speech, but if you are out there on the internet saying some crazy things, of course, I'm here on the internet, so I have to be a little cautious with what I say on this. But with all this, right, it is a little interesting. And, there's this great podcast from TFTC and Susan Kokinda who lined this out. And I'm going to show you guys a couple clips from this interview that I think highlight just how close the United States still is with the Bank of England in London, still having that monetary control.
Just think about what we fought the American Revolution against. We fought it against the British Empire. Now, what was that British Empire? Well, the British Empire was very much dominated by two institutions, the Bank of England and the British East India Company.
So the British East India Company was a giant gold company. And of course, the Bank of England is still running rampant and, obviously around today. And so I think when you look at a lot of what we see here, right, we see now there's been a task force bridged between the United States and the United Kingdom to utilize crypto and now surveil the ever-arching people of both of these countries. And the reason why I like to point this out is not because I enjoy talking about this potential, but I do think that it is very worrisome, the connection between the United States and the United Kingdom still being very strong, right? Because the US, we've already seen it, right? They've started to embrace stablecoins. I've mentioned on this channel plenty of times. So if you guys are coming back, please hit that subscribe button and hit that like button so we can start sending this one across. But either way, what I do see is that the United States has heavily embraced stablecoins. And now I think that it is for a few different reasons. One of them, Putin's recent advisor had pointed this out, that stablecoins need to buy up the United States debt, right? So in order to issue a stablecoin and do it against the dollar, so USDT, USAT, USDC, all of these stablecoins that are linked to the dollar, everybody wants the dollar because, you know what, out of all the fiat currencies, it's the best one. But regardless, all these stablecoin issuers, the more that people start to use these stablecoins, the more that they have to buy up United States government bond and US debt. So they buy up the debt, countries like Argentina, Turkey, all these places that have fiat currencies that are hyperinflating away, well, they're getting paid in stablecoins, which is helping them survive and get out of the volatility of their own. So, of course, there's the euro and the British pound, which are pretty close, but the Bank of England had always been very anti-crypto, let's call it, very against it all. And recently, right, the United States and the UK formed this task force to do all of this, right? Then we've seen JP Morgan already start to come out and freeze banks accounts of Jack Mallers. We've seen bank accounts getting frozen for other Bitcoin CEOs, including Corey Clipston of Swan and some of these others. And, the story of being debanked is not a new one in the Bitcoin industry. So we see these banks still utilize a ton of power so they can control you. And what's another thing that they've been doing in the past? They've been using the United States privatized institutions in order to do that. Now, this is where I think it gets very interesting because, the Bank of England recently just cut rates by 25 basis points down to 375, right? He's been saying, Tom Luongo is another one that's been saying the British Empire never ended. It still runs that financial web and it has its hands in everything, right? So even though the United States is, let's call it like financially independent, well, we do see the Bank of England coming to, you know, everybody's peril here and cutting interest rates. Well, what is one thing that the banks have been funding for quite a while? Well, they've been funding the war on drugs, which I think is all kind of a connection here. Now, we got to listen into this here as to what another part of what Susan was saying here, which I think is very interesting that connects all of this.
Is we're going to keep everybody under our control through financial flows and, by the way, through perpetual wars, and get them pitted against each other, and they have no place else to go for finances other than these private central banks or the institutions that are tied to the City of London. And then the upstart Americans came along and said, no, we don't.
Yeah, so of course, then we said, all right, well, we don't like that. But the interesting thing is that the international drug trafficking has been a financial crime system. That's also what she's been saying against this, right? So Britain has been, utilizing the narco networks moving through Venezuela and other places in order to, let's say, just keep the grasp on the United States. And so the United States has had essentially, two different things that they're really working on here, right? They've been working on trying to get out of the financial web of the United Kingdom, as well as getting out of this drug war. And let's face it, everybody thought that the drug war had, I guess, calmed down, right? We saw there was a massive fentanyl crisis. But if you look at the headlines right now, I honestly, when I was searching all of this, it was honestly kind of disturbing because we saw, I would like to say that the war on drugs was not over or relatively even close to over. And now we have writers coming out and saying it was over, but Trump restarted it. And, for those of you that are in the United States, I definitely don't think that this is the case. I think this is just political propaganda. But what I do think is that what we're seeing is Susan lining out that, the American Revolution and everything on, kind of started on with this monetary war. They didn't like that the Bank of England was controlling everything, the taxation, everything, taxation without representation obviously was the big calling cry. But the United States and the founding fathers all put this around banks, right? They said that having central banks was worse than having standing armies. And now we have them both essentially, right? And so the Bank of England and the City of London and all of these places have still had their empire running through the monetary networks. Now, they've also had massive amounts of influence on the education realm, a lot of different things as well. And then when you kind of break it all down, right, it's still all about control. And so connecting this back to the crypto task force, the United Kingdom recently had the digital ID that, has been showing massive amounts of, let's call it, resistance from the English people, right? This is where I think it gets very interesting because When you connect it to the crypto task force and the digital ID, now this gets into the banking laws. This gets into the laws that, it's not only just the UK wanting to go on and, look at, different things and want to know where you travel. No, no, no. They want to know all your bank accounts. You have everything linked to you digitally now. Right. And so, of course, you have that physical ID and maybe you could travel to different places. And maybe it takes a couple days, things like that. Maybe some of the software can get shut down. But when you have this digital ID, people know where you're at all times. It's connected to your phone, which is geolocated as well. And then on top of that, you have your money tied to all of this as well. So now, when you have that, and then you have stablecoins, which have already come out and frozen accounts. I mean, Tether and Circle have that, monopoly or biopoly, I guess. When it comes to the stablecoin market in the United States, this is essentially giving Britain the ability to say, hey, you know what? They've entered our country, or, we don't like what they said. We can, say, contact this 3-letter agency in the United States and freeze accounts right away. Right. So the connection between all of these countries isn't necessarily just like, oh, it's good for globalism. No, no, no. I mean, the United Kingdom has been very, let's call it, I guess attacking in a sense of people with their free speech. And now the United States forming this crypto task force with them allows the UK to essentially say, hey, US, we don't like what this person is doing. This is where you need to shut down their account, shut down their stablecoin account, freeze their balances, do all these different kinds of things. And it's not just, okay, hey, this would never happen in America. No, no, no. Now that they are moving on and crossing borders with this crypto task force, the Bank of England is now softening its stance for a reason. Now, one of the interesting things is that I think Trump is now starting to realize this, right? Because if you line it out here, like Tom Luongo kind of lined it out here as well. So well, I think I just lost AV, but what it essentially said was that, Tom Luongo was essentially saying that, Trump went after the Bank of England and the City of London, and he wasn't really expecting him to do that. Not a lot of people were, because of what I've lined out here. And, obviously we've seen the control aspect from the UK, but it's all connected when you realize who's actually funding the war on drugs. And it all turns back into the Bank of England. And we're going to get into that connection a little bit further. But at the end of the day, owning Bitcoin is the only true freedom that you can have. You can get across borders with it. All you need to memorize is your 12 to 24 word seed phrase. But right now, you don't want to sell to get your exit liquidity. Maybe you want to, buy some Christmas gifts. Maybe you want to buy a new house. You want to do some other things. You could go to saltlending.com/green-candle today. So you don't need to sell to get that exit liquidity. So go on over to saltlending.com/green-candle. They're giving you guys an exclusive offer today for Green Candle listeners. They've already got some of the best rates in the industry, starting at 9.95%, 1, 3 or 5 years, 70% LTV. And the best part's there are no liquidation solutions. So go ahead to go to saltlending.com/green-candle today, because, like I said, it's not just here, right? It's the UK is utilizing all of this with, is utilizing their war on free speech, their war on all of this, right? They're utilizing this stuff to attack people and attack their financial sovereignty, right? And so I've said it plenty of times on this channel, so make sure you guys are subscribed. But what I truly believe is that the United States doesn't dislike crypto or Bitcoin, right? They don't dislike it. They just want to know where you're moving it. They want to understand where you're they want to understand and track it at all times. This is why they're heavy on the KYC, because they can then control your accounts. They can tell these companies, hey, we want you guys to shut down this person's account. We don't want to have them have the ability to transfer money over, these third parties, utilizing Tether, utilizing Circle, utilizing some of these stable coins. And then on top of it, they want to implement the digital IDs. So this UK and US crypto task force now is all about surveillance at the end of the day. So not only is the UK closely monitoring free speech, and we've seen them already start to tap into a lot of the United States free companies, let's call it, not free companies, but companies, right? When you utilize social media, Twitter, YouTube, like I'm on right now, right? All of these guys, if I said something, against them, they have the ability to, I guess, tell the United States to try to censor me, right? And that's what's been going on, right? So the monetary influence is subtle but significant. Look, that's not me saying that. That's, strictly when you look this up, because there's massive inflows. The UK has a major source of FDID and FDI and bond holdings, and it's trade in sectors like finance and pharmaceuticals. What else happened here just 5 years ago, folks? That's all I'm going to say, right? So these effects from the Bank of England, where the UK cuts rates and pushes investors to higher yield in the US, it strengthens the dollar and potentially fuels the US inflation, right? So all of these guys are really in together, and we see the massive UK investment with the foreign direct investment and capital flows from the UK, right? So they've got the debt holdings, and obviously the Bank of England has cut. But the UK is export more to the US than any other single country, right? It exports to the US worth 59 billion. 16% of all UK's exports are to the US. And that's across the pond, right? I mean, of course, the UK is technically like an island if you look at it on the map. But with the UK or with the United States and the UK allegedly, being, I guess, like separate countries, it's interesting how they are still so close together, even after the war, right? Even after the US allegedly, became free from the United Kingdom. So what, did you think that the UK and the British just simply bent the knee to all of this? I really don't think so. When you keep on, going together and buying all of this, I think, when you dig into this dope war, right, and how this has progressed with Trump unleashing the toughest fentanyl crackdown in history. Everybody likes to point out, oh, it's China or it's, the Venezuelan, but at the end of the day, these banks have to allow these drug cartels to hold money. And these drug cartels are holding money in the same places that, are allowing, these drug lords to run rampant. And so when you look at the institutions that are now all of a sudden very, let's call it, we're very apprehensive and very against Bitcoin initially, that are now starting to embrace Bitcoin, I think it's for a couple reasons. I think it's because now these banks realize that they need to embrace Bitcoin, because they're going to do everything that they can to say, oh, you know what? Hey, clients, let's all of a sudden, we'll accept Bitcoin for you guys just because you guys have wanted it. But behind the scenes, what these banks are doing, I mean, I've covered it. There's a coordinated attack on MicroStrategy for holding Bitcoin. I mean, you don't just see JP Morgan and all of these guys. I mean, these banks are evil, folks. You don't see all of these banks, hiking up margins on MSTR from 50% to 95%, encouraging people to sell the best performing stock that's holding the best performing asset of this last 15 years because it's good for their clients. No, it's because it's good for their balance sheet, right? So this is what we're seeing, these banks start to attack the Bitcoin industry while just embracing it when they're, let's say, in front of people or in front of a camera. But behind closed doors, they're doing everything to attack this industry. And I think it's the same thing when you break it down between the Bank of England and more so everywhere else. So Trump has started to try to embrace Bitcoin and embrace that industry. He realizes it brings a lot of jobs. He realizes there's a lot of potential benefits. He realizes, let's be quite honest, that a lot of people that donated to his campaign were heavy into the Bitcoin space because he was going to be friendly to that industry. And so, he realizes that these banks run everything essentially. So, with these banks running, massive industries, they have the power to control how you move and shape your money. And Bitcoin takes that power away from the banks. Yeah, and I mean, look, Chris has said they've debanked his family. The Trump family has been debanked at one point in time. And so, the Bank of England is financing a lot of these drug cartels. Same with JP Morgan. JP Morgan was Epstein's banker. It's very well known with all of that. Right? So if you are doing something that is, I guess, nefarious, as long as you have enough money, these banks are going to turn a blind eye. The only way to do it is to keep opting out and buying Bitcoin. So shout out to MS here. Sure, silver maybe, but at the end of the day, who's going to buy that silver from you guys? I mean, you can't verify silver unless you have some sort of, you can't verify silver unless you're, I guess, have the tooling for that. But Trump attacking these, the Venezuelan gangs that are coming over and bringing fentanyl into the United States, I think this is his way of almost attacking, the banks of London and all these other places, because, essentially, Keir Starmer, you see it right now. England, they're doing everything they can to try to gain control. They're doing everything they can to make sure they have the power of the people. Their people are starting to rebel left and right? Their people are straight up just telling him, hey, we don't want this digital ID. You see the massive amounts of protests that you see going on. And then, we've got the banking industry that is now at odds. The only person that has not been in the system or been able to be affected by that system is Donald Trump, because, he's not that politician. Right? He's a deal maker, everybody says, right? And the Trump family embracing Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and them being debanked, I think is a big reason why people have started to see this, right? I mean, our traditional, I guess, allies in the United States are now a little shaky with us, right? I mean, we've seen Germany, we've seen others start to go against the United States simply because, we have Donald Trump in office. And now that he is attacking all of these, fentanyl boats, and this is like what's making headlines, why is the opposite side saying that it is such a bad thing for us to go and attack these people who are essentially bringing in drugs into the United States? You got to ask yourself that question. So, maybe the other political party is now funding or getting funded from these banks. That's where I think it is very, I guess, like interesting here. Very, very interesting to say the very least, right? So when you see these gunboats and you see the negative headlines, why would it ever be anything but positive to get drugs out of the country? Right? Allegedly, it was over, right? The war on drugs was over. But here's the thing, folks. The only thing that can combat this war on drugs and get away from the potential of people just manipulating your money system, we see it with Trump and all of these guys. The banks are the true enemies with all of this. I mean, if you sit back and look at, the founding fathers, what did the founding fathers say about banks? I mean, we're going to find some crazy quotes here because when you take a step back and look at all of it, I mean, these are the people that were extremely crooked, right? They had some notably hostile and strong views towards banks. Thomas Jefferson wrote that the banks were the more dangerous than standing armies. Believed that banking institutions were deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Sounds like a little eerie here, almost like he saw the future. James Madison opposed the first Bank of the United States as unconstitutional. He worried that the bank's potential to create an aristocratic class of financial wielding disproportionate to political influence. John Adams warned that banks have done more injury to the religion, morality, tranquility, prosperity, and even the wealth of the nation than they could have ever or will do good. Ben Franklin, he was pragmatic but cautious, emphasizing the danger of debt. Alexander Hamilton stood against it, right? I mean, all of these founding fathers did not like banks. So the only way to get out of banks yourself is by holding Bitcoin. And the truest power to do that is through self-custody. You guys can go to the affiliate link down in the show notes below for Trezor. They've got exclusive offers for holidays here. You guys need to get you some here really quickly. So go on to Trezor and you can get yourself a Trezor Safe 3 or 5 for 30% off. Or you could get yourself a Trezor Safe 7 with a free privacy screen. There's holiday shipping with, promo code holiday 25. So you got to go to the affiliate link down below to go get yourself a Trezor. Do that quickly for Christmas. Get your Bitcoin off exchanges for me. Then go to cryptosteel.com/greencandle. I've got both of them here. This is what I'm holding my Bitcoin in is. I got a Trezor Safe 5. I've also got a Trezor Safe 7 that they sent me. I got to do an unboxing video for you guys, so I'm going to do that. But even if you lose your hardware wallet, you can still figure out a way to get your Bitcoin if you have your seed phrase. So this is why it's so important to get yourself a CryptoSteel. And you can use promo code GreenCandle to get 10% off. So for Christmas, all I ask for you guys is to get your Bitcoin off an exchange and to back it up. If you guys haven't backed up your seed phrase now, what are you doing? Do that quickly. And do it quickly because I think the war on drugs is really heating up. Like I said, if you search this, it looks like the war on drugs isn't, it was all Trump's fault and everything else. And they're always going to blame him on the other side. But I think this gunboat diplomacy, I think that this, obviously the banks are going to see, Trump bombing all of these. He's classifying them as terrorists, and I don't see, any issue with that, to be quite honest. But, the banks are not going to like that, their money makers are getting bombed, right? They're not going to like seeing that their money makers are getting blown to smithereens. They're not going to like to see that their money makers are not being able to sell their product across there, right? So Dub is saying the war on drugs turned into accepting drug abuse, including helping addicts with free paraphernalia. I agree. It's honestly a shame out there. I appreciate that. I just got a nice chop. Shout out to my barber out here making me look good. But make sure you guys are hitting that like button for me and that subscribe button because, as we're starting to see this war on drugs escalate, I think it all has to do with the Bank of England and seeing this, right? I think what we're starting to see a lot here is, the Center for Digital Hate coordinating by central banking, central regulators. I think it's really interesting because this is starting to blow up right now. Trump is starting to disband this, and it's a bunch of people from the UK with these policies, right? I showed you guys, it was the the UK's Online Safety Act, which has kind of sparked a lot of this. And, seeing this, the war on peace, and they're essentially promoting this message. It's honestly, insane that the war is peace. Freedom is saying, I mean, obviously this is, tongue in cheek what they're saying, but, freedom of speech is a foundation, right? That's what they're saying, allegedly. They condemn demonstration of freedom of speech, right? I mean, I just lined out to you guys how, like, in the UK, all of these things, they're not free. Freedom of speech is not there. Keir Starmer came out and said, you will not work in this country if you do not have a digital ID. So it's really ridiculous, right? The European Commission, I mean, look at this. They sent Elon Musk a letter. This is going around right now. They sent Elon Musk a letter threatening him with legal action if he dare to host an interview with a candidate of the president of the United States. So, when you look at all of these, partnerships that the United States is bringing across, I am always of the belief to be extremely, extremely cautious with how it's being viewed here, right? And with how we're looking at the United States with the EU and all of these things. Because, the EU is extremely corrupt. And I think that, the closer we get to all of this, the more dangerous we can really start to see the US. I mean, like, I don't want us to get grouped in with all of these guys. And that's where I think, unfortunately, we're heading there. Because I think when you dive in to how Trump is going about this new, let's say his latest, I guess his most recent campaign, and how he is attacking it, right? What are the things that he's embracing and they're continuing to attack him? He's embracing Bitcoin. He's going at the banks. And then we're also seeing, the connection of these banking institutions now starting to go at not only the Trump family, but go at anybody who is holding and operating Bitcoin. So when you combine all of these things together, it really makes it for, why is the UK doing all of this? They've been very against Bitcoin as a whole. And the EU, like Dub is saying, right? It's not an elected body. So all of these guys, right? I mean, they're essentially trying to get their hands over in the United States. They realize that they can have the control. I mean, we can go in for hours. Let me know in the comments, like, if you guys want me to do a deep dive into still the UK's influence on the United States, because I think it's interesting when you really break it down, right? Sure, the United States has had independence, but the UK has had heavy influence on our education system, which is then, our belief on how we think, how we operate. They've had heavy influence on our banking system, which the United States originally wanted to get away from. But when we became more global, we said, okay, we'll start to model our monetary system off of what the UK is doing. Does that make any sense? When we essentially wanted to be free from the UK originally. I mean, all of these things, when you start to add it up, it just doesn't make any sense. And over time, the banks have just been essentially chipping away at the United States' freedom. We've got nearly 300 of you across YouTube and X right now. So make sure you guys are hitting that like and that subscribe button for me. Share the YouTube link around. I think the YouTube might be getting a little suppressed here. So make sure you guys are sharing that around with people, telling them to join the chat, hit the subscribe button for me. But let me know if you guys want me to do a deeper dive on all of this. And I'll catch you guys all at the next one.